Hey
Hello,
folks.
everyone. Welcome to the weekly Project Titan live stream. Today, we are going to be taking a deep dive into some of the design that's happening inside Project Titan, as well as a little bit of an overview of some of the artwork that's going in as well. So, hopefully, this is going to be a really informative and useful experience for everyone viewing, and also everyone in our Discord who are currently squirreling away on this project. As always, it has been just a delight to see all of the content that everyone's making. So we're going to start off, as we always do, with just a little bit of a highlight of some of the really cool things that we're seeing inside Project Titan. So if we cut to my lovely screen, we can see here. So generally, kind of just want to call out the Sulfur team. I do feel a little bit bad because Sulfur are the only people who've yet to receive a critique video from me. That is on my to-do list, and we will do it at some point soon. But we've got some really cool looking tents coming in here that are looking nice. Some really nice looking spaces. So this area in general is starting to look very good. One of the nice things as well is that when I walk into these buildings, it doesn't immediately feel like it's just going to be completely cramped. Though do keep in mind that you do have to put stuff inside the buildings, and that will take away from the overall playable space. But looking really good. We've also seen this lovely, lovely night market pop up, which is really, really cool. In fact, I do feel like I should go in and just set the time of day manager to be nighttime just to match it, and we'll just see how that looks in the night. Oh, I've lost my sky again. Oh, good. Anyway, um, so anyway, this is looking really nice, really lovely kind of design in the middle with the mushroom building and these lovely little kind of set prop places where people can kind of sell their wares. So looking really good. Someone has been taking very careful notes on some of the videos that we've been posting on the Epic Tips thread inside the Discord because we've got some really, really nice looking rocks being placed into the world, really kind of fleshing out those big shapes before they get too involved in working into the smaller ones. So some really nice work going on here. This is looking absolutely awesome on the rock side. And again, some of this stuff is being carried through some of the other areas as well. I think we've even got a very nice looking oasis coming together over here as well. And these really cool rock shapes that are really accentuating and adding to the overall feel of the world. Carrying on the rock form, we've got some really nice stuff on Starter Island cropping up. So again, really kind of like defining those edges and those shapes. Something that we can't really do that easily with the landscape, getting a nice crisp line and those really harsh edges that still keep a lot of geometry. So bringing that in with Surface is really, really nice to see as well. We haven't had a chance to talk much about Arctic in this project yet, but we're starting to see a really cool town develop that's coming in here. One of the things I love about this is the kind of like the little kind of tucked away underpass that we have coming in where the what looks like a Titan's thumb is coming in, and some quite cool building shapes coming in there as well on some of those designs. So some nice stuff there. Going over to volcanic, we've got some really awesome shapes coming up on these kind of standing plinths for all of the city as it kind of sits above what I'm assuming is going to be some very hot lava. But some really nice kind of designs coming in here. One of the really good things and important things with when you're building a block out is that they should be a good representation of the shape, and it should be clear what that thing is. And the bigger that thing gets, the more necessary that is. So it's really nice to see these kind of forms and shapes coming in, even if they're not going to be the final ones that we're using. It's really nice to see that, kind of coming up and really giving us a clear view of where you're going direction-wise. Marshlands, again, which is our feature screenshot that we're using for today, is looking really nice. Again, definitely looking at those videos on the Epic Tips channel, because this forest has some of the best overdraw that I have seen, or nanite overdraw I've seen on a project so far. Really, really nice, kind of work going in there to make sure that we've got nice, clear cutoff of geometry, so that we're going through, and some nice ground foliage coming in as well, and some very clear, nice kind of directing with these boardwalks that are popping up. So some really good work all round. Again, absolutely incredible to see. We posted about your work in there. We've got you on the swag list already. So congratulations. You've earned yourself some swag. We'll obviously be kind of sending out more and more of that as we get further and further along with the project. But today, I'm not going to be doing that much talking, because our excellent designer, Sam, is going to be leading the charge, talking about designing this world that we're building so that it's actually fun to play as well as good to look at.
Going for that, yes. Well, while I'm loading into Titan Main, I will talk for a bit. And then when it's loaded in, I will start streaming and talk about design. So there are a couple of things I wanted to talk about just kind of globally off the top of my head, which is the first of which is when you're designing out a space, it has to fit into the world. This is something we've repeatedly said. And one thing I'm seeing a lot of is sort of the brief was this sort of stylized, whimsical, charming, painterly world. And I'm seeing some really cool stuff in that direction, but I'm also seeing a lot of this, but really big. And I love a giant skull. As you see, I sit in a dark void surrounded by dead things. It's entirely my thing, but this game isn't meant to be terrifying. And as a designer, I feel really one of my goals is to make sure that we actually get the mood across to the player that we want to get across. And I don't think that mood is terrifying. And I think in some cases, it's likely to break the player out of the game. We have a concept called suture, which is basically someone is in a state of suture, then they are fully immersed in your game. They are living in the world, they're believing it. And when you encounter something that takes you out of that, it breaks suture. And so some of our things, as cool as they look, there are some really cool giant skull things in the world. Like, I just don't want our world to become overtly terrifying, because I feel like that is against the brief of the project, and also will take the player out of the game. At this point, I'm just building textures, and then I'll be able to start streaming for you.
I've got it on my screen if you need.
If you want to bring it up on yours, and I can just talk about it. But yes, I was in the wrong map, like a smart person. But yeah, like this. It's really striking. It's like a heavy metal album cover or something. I also like heavy metal album covers, but it just doesn't quite fit the space of the world. I also don't know how I navigate it. I don't know why there's a thing coming out of it hovering in the air. Like, as a player, I hit this space and I don't know what to do. Basically, there's this thing going into the eye, but it's kind of going into the top of the eye for some reason, and I'm not sure why I would go in there if it doesn't look like there's anything inside there. So I'm just traversing a space for some reason. There's just it just doesn't feel like as intention. I don't mean to rag on this skull in particular, but I feel like a lot of these are giant skulls for the sake of being giant skulls, because we said giant dead things in our landscape, and that's a way to go. But
I can move over to another skull if you'd like.
If you want,
if you'd like to feel less bad about it. But
I don't want to just rip on one skull, because there's nothing wrong with this skull. If I was doing a heavy metal album cover, well, one, you'd have to hear me sing. No one wants that, but I would totally use something like that. But yeah, in our world where, like, if you look at our protagonist, like if you look at Lost Fang, she's this like charming, whimsical character in this charming, whimsical world. Lost Fang and this just don't mesh. And I think that takes you out of the game. If you're playing Ratchet and Clank and you end up in Silent Hill, then things are definitely not right.
I'd also say on this, this one as well, like, I don't think they're playing the game in, like, when they're looking at this, right? Because if they had, they'd realize that they have made this, like, I'm not going to run the whole way because it would take a very long time for me to run it, but they've got this incredibly narrow path for the entire thing, and it is long. It is like, kilometers long, that our player is having to run there, and nothing's happening when
So
you're
here's
running
a
along.
here's a designer trick for you folks. When you one, play your spaces, two, build proper collision for your spaces so you can play them. You'll notice me rag on that a bunch. But three, if you have OBS, record yourself playing through your space and then see how long the video is. This is something that I did. I mean, I posted that as feedback in some cases in the Discord. Is here's me running through your space. It takes me 3 minutes. So 3 minutes from a designer perspective is that could be a whole game level. That is a multiple, like linear shooter levels length of distance and with nothing in it. And it just isn't going to be a fun experience for the player. It's like I said about Forest earlier this week. If you're just in infinite world of trees, then it ceases to be interesting. It's just sort of repetitive and you feel lost. And here you're in a space, you're like, why am I running across this thing? There is no purpose, there's no intent to it. And yeah. So really think about your scale. Actually, since I have screen sharing up, I'm going to talk about playable space and scale. Could we switch to me? If that's okay. We'll see how this goes. So where am I? I'm over here. For some reason, my materials aren't showing up. Please bear with me. So I was bouncing around yesterday in the clifftop area, which is full of all these enormous things, some of which I'm going to talk about in a sec. But I zeroed in on this little space here, which is not complete. You really need to put some proper floors in there as opposed to just big white boxes. But this is a good example of what I think of as a space that can be completed in the time that we have. That also, let's see how that goes. All right, so I am in the world. Now you look at the scale of the space from when you're zoomed out, like I was in Editor, it looks teeny tiny. This is me in that space. This is what I'd think of as a point of interest in Fortnite, say, or a part of a multiplayer shooter level, or the entrance to a dungeon, that kind of thing. It's actually quite a large space, but it is built in such a way that it's easy and fun to navigate. It has clean sight lines, though I do wish this building was less of a box. I like cool angles. But also could be completed by a single person, especially if they're depending on assets built by the people that are reusable, because there's nothing in here that couldn't be used elsewhere. I see columns all over the place. This is a space that a person could complete in the time we have and get it to a really nice, polished level of quality. And they've clearly spent some time running about it and thinking about how much space they have to move in. So some things to think about while I'm running about. So since we're not doing parkour, it is nice to have your collision help the player. So if you have a little step up like this for a design reason and not just because you're doing block out, put a little invisible collision ramp in there so I don't have to jump. It just feels more natural if you help me over things. Same with something like this. Unless you want to actually block me, maybe help me over it, because I'm just exploring the world. Like, do some simplified collision that helps the player. But so to go back into the editor for a second, just to kind of reinforce my point. Also, we're seeing a lot of warnings in the map, folks. Less map warnings. Warnings would be nice. If I zoom out again to, the usual thing when we're looking at the level, it's this tiny, tiny, tiny space here. So that makes you think about the spaces we're building out and sort of the level of work involved. But also, if you are a single creator who wants to build an interesting space, I think that's a good example of someone building an interesting space that they can build. While we're on the clifftop, if you don't mind, I'm going to do a little bit of design feedback on the clifftop. It's great that you took a lot of Aaron's notes on scale and scope. I think it's worth taking in also the notes on these cliff faces and cliff faces in general, which is, if you can see, people are starting to block out cliff faces with rocks elsewhere, like we saw on Starter Island. I think any tall bit of polymesh like this, where it starts to look a little unnatural, you should be dressing up with rocks. You should be building out the cliff structure, like we've also seen in the desert. There's some really strong work there too. One, because it gives shape to your city, and two, it allows you to make your mountains make sense to your environment. I'm sure Aaron will bring this up if I don't. This castle is really tiny now. The layout itself is really solid, but it is very, very small. And so it kind of loses a bit of the impact when you see it from like a sight line. Over here, it suddenly becomes very, very tiny. I don't feel like I'm going to the castle at the end. I just feel like it's a bigger part of the city. And that doesn't all have to be playable space. That doesn't all have to be interior space, but you might want to make your shape language a little larger. Um, Aaron may disagree with me on this, but I actually think this scale of castle space, it's still block out. You need to take it beyond block out. And I already gave notes in the maze, so I'm not going to linger on that, but don't do mazes. Um,
I think like part of this is our fault as well, right? Like the Clifftop team have been very good at responding to feedback.
Yeah,
And
really kudos.
one of the pieces of feedback was when they originally did the castle, which actually did have originally quite a good sense of scale. But it had a what I would say not a very good sense of design. It was very kind of like very narrow internally, and there was a lot of kind of like kind of quite small cramped spaces and lots of them as well. So they're kind of like building up an expectation of themselves to actually design and build all of those individual areas. So when we said kind of like you've given yourself a massive load of work here by building this, they naturally went, oh, okay, well, we'll just make it smaller. And that's one way to solve that problem, right? But actually, with these kinds of structures, right, like if you look at the way that kind of like these buildings are laid out, they are massive. But they have like a sense of scale and grandeur about them that doesn't necessarily need to be filled with stuff. But it's you can make the rooms bigger and not have as much in them. And there's lots and lots of really good examples of this. But like if you look at any large scale kind of like castle and structure, they have these massive spaces. And if you look at the interiors of those spaces, they're huge as well. So one of the good ones is like the biggest room that they have, which actually was originally fine, I think, the way that it was. But I think if they kind of go in, and again, like if we switch to my screen, or oh no, Sam's already got it up. Yeah,
I'm over
the
here.
entrance to this, the main room is this tiny little kind of porthole on like the what looks like the third floor. I don't know if you can see it, Sam, where that window is. Yeah, and then it leads into this room that, again, if you play, has very little sense of like scale or grandeur or impressiveness. And that doesn't necessarily need like a massive amount of like decoration to it, but it does need that sense of grandeur and that sense of scale. So if you look at your character running around it, you go in, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a room. Like
it's a room that would feel big in real life,
yeah,
but it does not feel big in a video game space. We tend to like first person shooter characters are about 5'3" tall, so the world feels bigger. We do a lot of tricks, and yeah, like here, if I looked up and the ceiling kind of disappeared into darkness, it implies a much bigger space without you having to detail it out like crazy. Like light and shadow can really sell a space as being bigger, but yeah, just pushing the walls back and the ceiling up, but keeping the same basic layout would definitely help. Like there's a dude on a throne, he should be higher up. The throne should be more imposing. I should feel humbled when I enter this room, because the whole point of this kind of room is to humble the people who enter it before the king. So, you sort of factor that into your space. It's something I talk about a lot, which is intention. What is the intention of the space? If the intention of the space is you're entering this fortress where you're going to feel humbled and before the king, then it should really sell that. As opposed, I feel like I'm going into a small church.
And this still had the same problem, right, as the original design that we critiqued, because those stairs are very tight and very narrow, like feeling for the character. Again,
watch
like,
me break the camera.
These stairs would probably be fine for like real life, but for this, like you've suddenly gone into that really cramped space again, and it's like, no, just like make it big, make it epic. That's going to give
you spiral.
Well, don't make it spiral. Well, but anyway,
you see what happens when you let designers talk?
But yeah, like actually, kind of build it up, make this castle epic, because again, when you see it from a distance, you're like, oh, someone's put a castle over there. It's not like, ooh, I want to go over there and explore it.
Like basically, also where I come out, there are things that are higher than me across the bay, so I feel like I'm not in the king's castle. I'm in someone else's castle. I just broke Crapple. But yeah,
Yeah, the collision's not 100% on this either. But yeah, like I think that's going to be really good. I mean, one of the things that I think is would be a good example to look at is one of my absolute favorite games, Dishonored. And there's there's the I think it's one of the last missions where you have to assassinate I think it's like the High Overseer or something like that. And you go in and there's the kind of like the main hall, and it's absolutely massive. And then it's got a mezzanine level, and then above it, it's got like kind of basically his bedroom right at the top and kind of like a bit further back. And if you have a look at that game from a layout point of view, again, like all of the spaces are absolutely huge. And that's with a first person camera as well, where they don't have these kinds of issues. Um, so that's potentially a good example to look at for trying to figure out the kind of space that you're building.
in general, immersive sim levels do a lot to show you how to use a space to its most. Like I also love Dishonored, and one of the things they do is they'll build a huge space and surround it with interesting ways to enter and leave that space. So you like one of the things here, and please, I'm not ragging on your castle. Um, this is what would be if we were building a game together and I was the lead designer. This is what I would be doing. Um, but if I'm in this space, the only way to go is up this flight of stairs that leads me to sort of to the rooftop, which is nice because I like the idea of being up on the roof. I like the idea of having a really nice vista. But this is just a linear flight of stairs, which just isn't especially interesting as its play experience. Like I need to, if it's going to be linear, I need to feel like I'm being led up the stairs to find something interesting. Right now, it's just like these tight stairs that I run up. So you might want to think of alternate ways up, like open up some of the windows so people can go out the window and go up the wall, something like that. It just generally makes these spaces breathe a lot more if you can do that. But yeah, look at the Dishonored games. They're a really good way to, one, they're very stylized, admittedly in a very different way, but they do a lot with a relatively tight space to make it feel massive. And they're doing it in tech that is not really built for giant streaming worlds. Aaron, can I talk about chains? Do you mind if I talk about chains for a
Please
little
talk
bit?
about chains.
Okay, so I have some issues with the entrance to the harbor. It's one of from my point of view, the most scenic parts of Titan. And I, you know, when we're building out the landscape, that was always my thought. This is a really scenic harbor, and we're doing a ton of stuff to just close it in, which I feel doesn't serve the space necessarily well. Like we have, if you can see my mouse cursor, this big thing, which is a dock area that blocks off one side of the island. So the only entrance is on this side, and then we have these chains hanging above it that perplex me. Honestly, yeah, again, nothing wrong with giant chains. I played a lot of Souls games. I like a giant chain, but I don't know why they're here. I don't know what purpose they serve. And for me, they just close off the harbor and really start to hurt what is a pretty impressive skyline. Like it starts to really clutter it up and make it feel like you're taking away from the impact of your space as opposed to adding to it. And I would, if it was me, if I had my druthers, I would just remove the chains and the floating thing altogether. If you want to keep the floating thing, make it interact more with the castle in the center. So it like, which it's already kind of doing, but the chains are also interacting, and I don't know what it belongs to, why it's there, and you need to give me a sense of purpose why the floating thing's there. So that's what I would suggest. You don't have to take my suggestions as gospel. I also would suggest opening up this side of the harbor a lot and just spending some time looking at your skyline from all the different points, because it is this, imagine running up over the hill. So I'm just going to go down here. I'm playing in a weird development build that skews my busted grass. But I'm going to run up to the hill and have that magical sweeping running over the hill moment, because I think that's one of the things we're really selling with this. All right. So here I am. Apologies for all the overdraw. Sprint. So running up over the hill. And so you see this like gorgeous skyline emerge, but the first thing you see is the chains. And they just take me right out of it, and they make the space feel smaller and less interesting. So not to go on a rant, but that is something you need to think about. I think you're hurting yourselves here. I don't think it's a thing you need to do for your space. So put some thought into it, and sure, you can come up with something really cool and creative, but it just doesn't sit well with me. Aaron, did you want to talk about houses in Clifftop while we're in Clifftop?
I would love to talk about houses.
Let's switch to Aaron's stream for that one if you have a stream.
I have several thoughts on houses. So first off, you know, kind of we've got we had a really fast block out on the Clifftop houses. So we had this, you know, kind of quite massive sprawling city get blocked out very quickly, but with some very, very basic shapes. So this has started to get fleshed out a little bit more in places, but it's starting to look like it's going to become very, very generic. So again, we are stylized, you know, kind of working towards a stylized brief. And the buildings that we're getting at the moment are very much, you know, kind of like this is a modular set that someone has put together. And the actual modular set itself has been very well put together. You know, it's obviously some very placeholder wood grain direction, which always annoys me. But, you know, kind of otherwise they have put together these pieces. But when you put them all together, ultimately, it all still looks incredibly square, right? And one of the things that we generally want to avoid are these kind of very flat, you know, kind of boring shapes that we have in here. Now, there's some really good examples of people not doing that around the world that is well worth having a look at. So we've got you know, kind of like the hut over here, which is quite nice. We have now I've got to just find them all. They are everywhere.
There's some nice ones in my...
Yeah. So we've got these lovely ones over here, which have some great, you know, kind of like shape language to them. They're kind of like, again, using different, you know, kind of shapes and styles. Some in the marshlands area, and again, they're hard to find in some places, but
yeah,
some
I love
of these
that one.
Really great style to them, and they really feel like they're, you know, they're avoiding that harsh line right on here. If we draw that line coming down, you can see that they break that line straight away. And they, you know, they're using the shape of the rocks to kind of like really bump out all of the edges. Again, you can kind of have a look around. We've got another good one over here. That's really kind of like just breaking that line, you know, kind of up as much as possible, and really kind of like showing, you know, kind of showing you what you can do.
And it really fits into the space. Like it feels like it belongs with those trees, with that grass, with the whole ecosystem, and it really works. From
whereas, you know, kind of what we've got here, like I can really kind of like see how it's going to end up, and it's going to end up with just like basically, it looks a lot like if you had cut, you know, kind of printed out like a box, you know, kind of like net, and then like glued it all together, and then made a little model city out of you know, kind of just squares, right? And that's what it's going to end up looking like if we're not careful. And what you really want is to start getting some more character and some more feel into it. But also, and I'm sure Sam can elaborate on this more, is that you really need to think about the design of this space from like a playable standpoint. There's a lot of roofs in here that again are starting to like encroach onto the non-traversable walkable slope angle. So you need to be really careful about how you're designing that, and then also like how the player is going to traverse it. So, you know, if you think about this in terms of like Assassin's Creed or something like that, they're not thinking about just the ground playable space. They're thinking about like the tiers of playable space that give you some height to play with and explore with. And as our character has a lot of ways of traversing around the space with both kind of like gliding and also, you know, kind of, you know, walk riding and grappling and so on, like you should really think about, okay, well, how can the player run through this space and how can they kind of like traverse around these areas? So trying to think about, well, kind of what of these tops are going to work is a really good idea. I've got a quick demo that I've just put in for this space here. So again, this is, kind of got a few different variants to it. So if I go in, I can show you a few of those. So with this one, if we play through, again, I can put in, just wait for this to finish loading. I should not have gone into the level instance and then press play. So with this one, we've got this central column, right, that we can run through. So we can also, we can get through that way. But there's also this kind of top section here that's kind of like opened up to allow us to kind of navigate that top area. So we have a few different ways of kind of like navigating that space. But also like we can change this up really easily as well. So if we create, kind of like modular variants that we can throw on, we can really easily change this, this whole structure. So for this one, again, I'll just go into the actual instance, the level instance of the level instance. So this one is the kind of like the building instance that I've put in. If I navigate to this, I've created another variant of this that we have here. So we can swap that out. And now we've got kind of like another set of tiers. So we can kind of jump up to this section, or we can jump up to the roof. And again, because it's kind of sloping, we can go in and we can attach that to the other side of things, kind of really easily and kind of like play it through. We can change the bottom section out and all those different things just give us some extra levels, but it also lets us kind of like play with those shapes a little bit more.
It's worth noting that they all conform to our camera and to comfortable navigation with the player character. The slope of the roof, the size of the interior spaces are all designed with our camera and movement in mind. And so, not to interrupt, but I think it's worth doing. When you're laying out your spaces, like you have to realize the player can go anywhere. They're going to be able to navigate anything. So if you're building something and the player ends up there and it just looks weird or feels weird, it's going to hurt their experience and take them out of the game again. So like having a roof that you don't look weird walking on goes a long way. Because even if you can walk on those really steep roofs, the IK is going to start looking weird. The character is going to start looking strange, and it's just going to, it doesn't look right. It looks like you're kind of running unnaturally up the surface, whereas the one Aaron has, you actually move on it naturally, and it lets you freely flow from space to space, which is a thing we talk about a lot in game design is flow. And often that's meant to mean like the hardcore game of flow, where you're taking on a boss in Dark Souls and you're just like fully in. But a flow is really just you're in the game, you're not being taken out of the game, it's just your experience. So if we can get people to flow through these spaces, where I'm like, I'm here, I can go here, I know I can run along that, I can hop off that, I can go here. And at each point you can see something interesting that you want to go towards, you have succeeded. If your space is like, I don't know where to go, I don't know why I'm here, and I don't know what I can explore and what I can't, then you're in more trouble. Back to you.
And yeah, no, absolutely. But again, like the other thing you should be considering is the interior of the space. Even if you're not going to actually let the player go into the space, which is absolutely fine. There's not very many games out there that let you go into absolutely every single building, especially ones that have kind of like a full city to them. But it's well worth kind of like building out the interior to test with. Now, annoyingly, I had one and it looks like it's not in here, so I'm just gonna have to go. I've got another demo though, so it should be fine.
Should file an editor help ticket. We'll help you out.
I'll put a request in something. So anyway, the two things you should be considering are, one, the playable interior of the space, and even if you're not, it's going to help give you a better idea of how big the building should actually be, because most of these buildings are probably not really big enough to actually have a playable interior, which again, you probably are going to want at least a couple of these buildings to be explorable, right? Like there should be some key buildings that you should enter. So you should think about the interior. So map out an interior and test it. It's very easy to do. But also when you're doing that, make sure that you're making your walls thick enough. Because one of the things that's very easy to do is to put in these really slither thin walls. And one, that's wrong from like a building standpoint. If you go and stand inside a door frame, again, it kind of depends on which country you're in, but when you stand inside a door frame, a lot of the time they're really thick. They can be about that thick a lot of the time. And as you go into kind of like older and older structures, those things get thicker and thicker, right? Because we had less complex materials that were able to support different weights. So those structures needed to be even thicker. This also has the added advantage of when you actually thicken out your walls, you'll get much less light bleed from any of the light scenarios that we've got in the scene. So any of your interior lights won't bleed out, and your exterior lights won't bleed in anywhere near as much as well. So just kind of like flesh out the interior and actually play it and have a run around and say, okay, well, if I put because again, like if we had this area, which, if we put an interior in here, on first blush, you're like, oh, okay, this doesn't look too bad. But then you're like, well, what if you needed to put stairs in, right, onto that interior? Like, how much actual space have you got for some stairs if you have your player in there? And that's going to really affect how you're actually going to be able to do it. So if you want to put in kind of like, kind of a non-arched wayed interior that's got a door and it's got like a spiral stair going up, like how much space does that actually need to give you stairs that are wide enough, that the camera's not going to clip through, that you're not going to constantly be kind of like the camera's going to be jutting up against the wall as you're running, kind of round in a spiral. It's all worth kind of thinking about. And again, so like trying to give this stuff character as well. One of the things that, kind of I say it's quite a well-known thing with stylization is stylization in general. Again, it depends on the kind of stylization you do, but stylization abhors a straight line. So all of these elements here that are straight, they need edging with something, right, that's going to break them up. So you need to kind of like bulk out the, kind of the line, kind of like really draw out the shapes to give yourself something more interesting. And when you're playing around with shapes as well, again, like I've got a cylindrical version of this building. It's really easy to kind of like play around with these shapes in a way that's going to kind of like show you what this stuff is going to look like. So if we go in, I'm just going to turn on my door preview so that we can see it. So we can go in and we can kind of like add in, let's say, a bit of a sphere here. And you can see like straight away that as soon as we start kind of like adding in some of those forms, you get a much more interesting shape as soon as you start, kind of like playing with those. So it's worth, kind of like exploring that, that shape language and really trying to get some good and interesting shapes in there. Even if you're not going to kind of like commit to them fully, it's worth testing them and playing with them.
One advantage of having larger building footprints is you need to place less buildings, which sounds obvious, but when you're laying out a city, it is definitely an advantage because there's just less you have to do to make a street. What it is going to do is completely change the layout of your streets once you start placing real buildings that are more appropriately scaled and so on. So what I would say there is it's very easy to get married to your basic block out. Don't as you get properly scaled buildings, as your kits come in, as you incorporate Aaron's feedback, like let the city evolve to work with your assets rather than trying to force your assets to work with a layout that's no longer entirely relevant. And especially when you're putting down buildings, think about what the player sees from the street in any point. Like if it's just a hodgepodge of buildings ahead of them, they're not going to feel like they're in the city. It has to feel like it was again built with intention, that your streets have a purpose and that there are routes through them that are interesting. So it's not just run down this street forever, but you can turn left or you can jump on this building or you could run through this pub. That's all fun, exciting stuff.
And play it.
Please
right?
play
like play it because like, we look at this stuff here. Someone's gone in and
beat me
tried
to
add some more stuff to it, but like is any of this going to actually be traversable, right? Like you look at these stairs and how narrow they are and how hard it is to actually navigate it as the player, and kind of like going through, it's like, do you honestly expect me to like run up these stairs in kind of, and for that to be an enjoyable experience and not keep falling off? Again, like all of these ones, like these ones are actually too big for my character to even recognize as like a walkable surface that I could go up. And then also, when you're thinking about your buildings, really think about what you're hiding with them as well. So we've got this massive, kind of like big wall structure here. If I hide it, like that's what you've just covered up, right? Like you've covered this entire vista, that really you could have been drawing attention to or like accentuating in some way. So it's worth, kind of like really looking past what you're, kind of what you're hiding and going, okay, well, is this better? What could I put here instead that is going to like help me show this stuff off? Again, like I'm not saying don't put any buildings here, but I am saying that you can think about different ways of like showcasing this this content.
If this was an actual city, that would probably be a park or someone's private garden overlooking that vista. It wouldn't be a big house. It would be like a park with statues in it where people go, something like that. Because it's like you think about the use case of your space, like people live there.
Also, these walls are still annoying me, right? Because it's just like you've put the wall from here to here, and then there's like a very defensible cliff face right there.
Makes my inner strategy game designer twitch.
From that point to that point. And instead you've got, okay, well, we'll take the wall and we'll run it all the way around here and not take into account like any of this, like,
how I would conquer your city is what I'm saying.
Free defensible space that I've got in this world. Again, like same with this one here, right? Like it's just, you've taken the cliff top and you've just gone like straight over it. And it's like, think about the fact that you have like all of this cliff face running along here. And these aren't small cliffs, right? Again, like it's really, this is something that Sam and I did loads when we were designing out the landscape. It's so easy to forget how big this space is when you're orbiting around it like this, and you're constantly just flying around at this height. And it's only until you actually drop in and you play that you really see, kind of like how big these cliffs are and how much distance you're actually traversing when you run around. Again, like look at that. It's just, it's a massive space. So really play more. And again, it runs all the way along there, kind of like a wall.
Doesn't mean you have to build the city out to the wall either. Like we have all kinds of cool village kits at this point. They could be village, they could be farmland, all kinds of stuff that would need to be protected from people who would raid it. And so please don't make the city massive to accommodate the wall. But I agree with Aaron. Like again, you have to think about it as if you were going to attack the city. Why would the wall be like that? It wouldn't be. If it was, you would conquer it and knock it down and build a new wall that was proper. So so I wanted to talk about forests for a sec. If you'll allow me a second to do a quick bit of forest feedback. Dan, can you switch to me? There we go, that's me. Okay, so I'm seeing a bunch of nice forest work actually starting to come in through PCG, which is really exciting because I made a video about forests. And so I saw this one come in and it's gained a bunch of new trees since last time I looked at it. But I wanted to talk a little bit because it feels like this is a good start in that you have trees of varying sizes. I would start varying the angle more. I would also start varying a placement. They are all relatively uniform placed. Maybe have if you don't want to put trees closer together, I would consider some kind of large palm brush kind of thing because this is a tropical forest. I would also say, well, I like the really dense undergrowth that you've done. You should have gaps in it. You should have essentially paths that would guide the player through, because right now I see this space, and let's jump into play mode and see how that goes. If I run through the space, like I'm going to be basically lost.
I mean, it's the main trick, right? Just play it. Like play it and run through it, and you will immediately see the problem with what with what's been put down, right? Like it's completely obscured. And this happens in if there's a few places where this is happening, right? And again, this is just um, this is fine. Again, like I know we might be sounding like we're really kind of like having a go at everyone with this stuff, and we're really not. Like this is the main reason why we ran this project, right? Was so that we could start teaching this stuff and have a really good a good problem pieces and how to go
I'm
about
actually
solving.
lost now, by the way.
Yeah, no, it's very easy to, yeah. But there's a couple of forests out there that do it. The marshlands is probably one that's again is showing some really nice
Yeah,
improvement on that. And
let's
it's
bounce over there because I'd like to talk a little bit about what they're doing. Sorry, all my materials are haywire. Happens to the best of us. Let me
yeah,
turn
what
off
have you
some.
done with the project?
You get sick for a day and then you let me run wild. This is what happens. I'm gonna turn into Dark Souls meets Road Warrior. It's gonna get crazy. But one thing you'll notice here is they've done the same thing where they have the undergrowth, they have different sizes of trees, and they have a much wider range of scale of their trees, which really helps break up the skyline. So it's not just like trees, it's like you get this nice curve where you see the sky. You'll also notice it feels dense, but there's not actually that many trees. It's like a forest you could do on a Switch without going, oh no, we're gonna have to optimize the crap out of that. There is enough space for the player to easily move between the trees. I'm not going to play it because we have walk bugs in here right now. But the space feels designed to move through, but still be convincing. Like that looks like convincing swampy forest land. But if you get close, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trees, not 60 trees, not 30 trees. It's all about how you place them and what you put around them. They've obviously put a ton of work into katydids and the lilies and all the undergrowth stuff. And I think that really sells the forest. Oh, eyeball plants. But it's like you feel that this is a complete ecosystem and it's also set up to be played versus being set up to just be seen, because we are building an interactive exhibit. This isn't an art museum. This is an interactive space you walk through. So like it needs to be walk throughable.
Yeah,
Oh,
there's a real urge with PCG to just go in and be like, okay, well, I'll just scatter content down. And actually, like when it's a playable space, that's not really something that you can do. You have to design the PCGs in a way that allow you to design the space still, rather than just throwing content down. Like when it's distant, non-playable space, then you can start to get a little bit more generic with it and just start kind of like, because then at that point you're just designing Vista, right? And you're just throwing down content. And as long as you've optimized it correctly, it doesn't really matter as much. But this is playable space that the character has actually got to run through and has got to be able to navigate and has got to have some form to it. So at that point, you really do need to start designing the PCGs to work much more intelligently and to give you a design input as well, which is what happened here. There's a couple of PCGs that are communicating with one another to allow, kind of areas where they shouldn't spawn and to respect paths and things like that, that are really kind of like helping to make this feel like a more designed space rather than something that has just been randomly, kind of spawned into the world.
I know where I need to go. The paths curve, which is great because it adds mystery, because every time I run around something, you will hear my dog for the next half an hour. Like something is revealed. There's no straight lines. Everything is a curve, but every time I stop and look around, the space feels intentional. I'm always seeing something in the distance that's interesting. I'm like saying, oh, there's a building over there. I want to go over there. And then so I hop over, I go running across, and then suddenly I'm over at this building and I stop and I look around. What do I see? In each case, I'm seeing an interesting skyline. I am seeing things in the distance. Now I see that tree. And in each case, the space is leading me from point to point in a way where it feels designed, and it's using PCG to accentuate the design rather than replace it. Because PCG is not a replacement for level design. It is a tool for level design and environment layout. It's just the way like our machine learning animation tools are there to enhance animation and help animators, not to make you magically a better animator. And so you really need to think about the design of your space when you do your PCG. It's not just mesh scatter. It's about building space for the player to run through. And yeah, if you're not designing it with intention, as I keep saying, then it's going to be obvious to the player, and they will feel, why am I even here? What's the point of me being here?
And again, like you look at those boardwalks, and I think they're about like 7 or 8 meters wide, right?
Mhm.
And that, like, if you think about that logically, right? If you go out into like a boardwalked area, those things are generally like 2 meters, maybe 3 at most. But this, when you run through it and you play it, it feels right. Like when you actually are playing the game, your character doesn't feel ridiculous. So it really works from like a design standpoint. Like I can go around and I
It
can run through
brings
space and it doesn't feel silly, even
it's
though it is
frictionless. Yeah.
massive.
Yeah, it's like it feels right for the character and it's frictionless to explore. You're not getting hung up on collision or falling off the path, or like it feels like everything is designed to make your exploration a pleasant experience. And it's really nice work. So yeah, I wanted to talk about what some of the reasons it worked. I wanted to talk about the desert a bit. Aaron, can we
Oh,
swing over the desert?
I'm still not done with marshlands yet because
Oh, okay, please go.
because
Do you
it
want
can
to take the screen and talk marshlands? And
just a little bit, yeah, because it can still be
to
better,
Aaron.
right? So it's the thing is that, so this is really, like it's probably one of the most developed regions that we have. But there's still so much more that you can do with it. And I think one of the key areas where marshlands is still lacking is in verticality. So the space that we gave was naturally quite flat, mainly because we wanted to have these nice kind of like lumpy, kind of hills with the kind of like the watery areas around it. So we designed kind of like quite a flat space, and there's quite a few flat spaces that have been purposefully put into the game world. But that doesn't mean for a second that they should end up being flat, right? They should still have lots of verticality to them. So the space that we've got here, they're building on top of the base that's been given, but really they should be thinking about how they can elevate that space first to really accentuate it, kind of a lot more. So, kind of one of the areas in which they can do this is that they can start putting some, some height pieces in, so some higher areas of the marshland. And they can do this both through, kind of like rock geometry, or kind of like fake landscape elements, or they could do this through the trees that they have as well. So one of the things that's quite noticeable is that there's a very kind of fixed canopy height for this space here. But then there's a completely different canopy height for this area over here. And it's really kind of a little bit jarring that they've got these kind of two very kind of different heights to the world that have two very different playable spaces. Again, if we look at this, one of the nice things about this space, even though it's lacking in some of the areas where the other one isn't, is that it's got these larger shapes that are really coming in and adding a lot more kind of interest to it, but then also a lot of kind of like overhead canopy as well. So they've got these big kind of root structures. I don't think you can technically go under because I don't think the collision's quite right on them, but they have got these nice kind of like larger undershapes as well. So really think about how like you can add space above that the player can go under, but then also space above that the player can get on top of, right? So it really gives them that kind of like extra level of kind of like verticality and space that they can play with. Because at the moment, again, like if you just kind of use it based on the fixed plane, it's really not going to kind of add anywhere near as much there. So again, there's two areas there that are very different, but really we want to see those kind of come together and really blend.
Yeah,
But that's it.
One thing I'd point out with that high canopy is it totally changes the atmosphere of the space, which I think is really valid. Like it filters the light differently. It creates the sense that you're kind of in a giant cavern of forest, which is, really sets a tone and a mood that I think is quite impressive.
Yeah, I think they've also put a post-process in here as well. That's quite
those sneaky people.
It's quite aggressive. But, yeah.
It's like they are really focusing on selling the space, which I think is key. It's fun to explore.
If we can get like, take the best parts of both of these And again, like this one, it probably needs developing the most still because while it has started to introduce some of those higher areas that the player can go under, they haven't got any, kind of playable areas that are higher. So really think about that kind of vertical space in there.
And
I think this is where the spider was as well,
yeah,
somewhere.
R.I.P. Spider. Oh, there we go. So one thing to think about when you're doing this, and I'm going to keep harping on this, my hobby horse, put in proper collision because you can't play your space without least representative collision. I keep seeing these giant spaces that are all detailed out, and then the collision is a big blob, and that just doesn't work, especially not at this point in the project. You need to be playtesting your work. We need to be playtesting our work. So please just take a little bit of time to put in some decent collision for your space so it can be used in game, and that way you can also playtest it, and you won't hear about it from us on the live stream as much.
Sorry, do you want to move on to the?
Yeah, let's do the desert. Yeah, I have thoughts on the desert, and feel free to drive around, and I can talk. So my first big issue, yeah, we can start there. So this really doesn't fit the Titan brief. It's like a cool heavy metal album cover image, but it we've talked about the Titans receding into the landscape. I don't see how this recedes into the landscape, how this has been here for 2,000 years. There's a bunch of these across the game where, like Aaron brought this up before, if you have a giant thing that's 3,000 years old, it's not going to look like this. It's going to be barely there. It'll be part of the landscape. If it's found and partially excavated by people, it might look partially like this. But yeah, instead, it's just kind of a giant dude in a seat, and it feels a bit out of step with the tone of our world, and it's really big.
I would also, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing. Like if you've got a structure that's this big, it needs to be designed, right? Like you can't just put a mannequin into the world and go, that's it, right? Like what you've built here is a level, right? Like just like I think this tree over here is a really good example.
This is a level.
Right? Like this, they're building this. It's an environment, but it is a level, right? It has navigable space. They're thinking about how the player can traverse it, places where the players
half an hour just bouncing around this space looking at stuff.
Right, like you can go in and you can play it, but if you just put in a big mannequin and just call that, that's the base, then that's not really a good representation of the design of the space. And even if you've just put this in as a placeholder or as a blockout, it's not a blockout, right? Like, because it's not representing how the player is going to be able to traverse it. So the first step should have been, if you're going to design something like this, and one, it shouldn't be this because this is a statue, not
I was going to say
this is kind of turned.
This is an exploratory game, not a sculpture garden, and that's definitely a sculpture.
But you've got to design it. You've got to think about this as like an actual playable area that's going to be fun to explore and to look through. And like I can't even do that because there's no collision.
There's no collision,
proper collision on the asset.
You make me sad.
I've just got to kind of like run up it like it's like that.
Like I could imagine like taking some of the composite elements of this and building out a fun, interesting, playable space. I think a giant man in a chair is probably not it, but you could take the core concept, reimagine it closer to the brief, and make like a fun part of the cliff where you realize you're climbing up what once was a giant person in a chair, and let the player put that together over time as they explore and go, oh, wait, this is part of a throne. Wait, this is a forearm. And suddenly it's part of the landscape, and it's also fun and discovery.
And then realize, kind of what workload you're giving yourself as well when you go in and build something of this scale. You've just made something that's like probably 1 kilometer high or near enough to it, right? Like and like you've got to make that. You've got to actually build that as a playable, fully, kind of like fleshed out, artistically finished, design finished space that is fun to run around and play in. And that's a massive job. And there's a few of these, right? We've got another one over here that is this just absolute eyesore on the landscape, where it's just been kind of like just dumped in, without thinking about, kind of like how the player is going to navigate it, the fact that it's just this massive flat space once you get to the top of it with these buildings that are let's see if
To
there's
turn
any.
into a lead designer, how do I get there? Why do I want to get there? Why are we building this? And it's nothing against the artist or their work. It's just more how does it fit into the space and why is it there?
Hmm.
And I mean, that's the reality of game development is everything we build has cost in terms of money and time. So we have to pick our battles. And so you have to look pretty hard at everything you do. And like this thing is enormous, doesn't really fit the brief. And as Aaron said, feels like it's just a model dropped into the landscape. It doesn't feel like it's part of the landscape at all, which
Yeah, a lot of these things that are being put into the world are very clearly like this character here is very clearly like a mesh that it was intended to be human height, right? Like or near enough to it. Um, and they have just scaled it up. And you can't think about it in those terms, right? Because if you're just going to scale it up and then bring it in and leave it as that, you haven't actually designed that as a level piece, right? Like this is not a character. This is a level. This is an environment. So how is the player supposed to traverse this thing? They just like they won't be able to do it, and there's no clear design path.
when you
Um,
get up there, what do you find? Why is it interesting?
yeah. Again, like the I think probably a good parallel is like the divine beasts in Breath of the Wild. Those things again, they are these creatures that are absolutely massive, but they have been like meticulously designed, kind of so that they are levels that you explore, that you play around. And that's how you've got to think about these kinds of things. Um, Again, like we've got these things here, which are
Uh,
just
I have
triangles that have been
I have
placed in the world.
thoughts. So yeah, if you're so what's funny with these pyramids is if you play in this space, they make it feel smaller. Like if you are on the ground exploring what should feel like, the Valley of Kings, essentially, it in fact makes the desert feel way smaller because there are these giant collision busted things in the middle of it. I don't, yeah, it's basically from my point of view right now with the desert we have a ton of really big things all crammed out in the northwestern corner of the desert, then a ton of blank space. And I feel like those statues I'm sure Aaron could give way more feedback than me on, but they again don't really fit the brief. It's I too own Dio's Holy Diver. It's very cool, but not, and that space is huge. It's freaking enormous. Like it makes me wonder what's inside it. Why would again what's going to fill that space up and make it interesting?
Yeah,
So
it makes you forget when you see like a building like this. It's like, oh my God, it's like a building for ants. And then you go and you play like, oh no, that's a normal sized building. And this is massive.
yes, I would really suggest a rethink on this part of the desert. I think you could make a really effective sort of Valley of Kings style space, but right now the layout just feels like a bunch of pyramids dropped on the space. The skull is gone, I guess, so I can't
I
complain
don't
about
know
the
that
skull
I
fighting
don't
with
know
the
that that's
pyramid.
intentional. I suspect there's
Is a
because I think
thing.
it was like somewhere a couple of thousand units down there. I think the pivot's been
Oh,
messed up somewhere along the
fun.
line.
But yeah, so the skull fights with it. There was the aqueduct there that also fought with it. All of those pieces are fighting with each other. You really want to pick a key theme for an area and go with that as opposed to dropping all the pieces on top of each other and having five giant things in one small space in an otherwise very sparse environment.
Mhm.
I think you should also be looking at the desert oasis and the other rock blockout area for how to build out your environments to sell your space and how to make the desert interesting without just filling it with stuff
Yeah, I think
like
just
this refined with some nice PCG for the like for flora and so on would like some tumbleweeds, like all that feels really good. I feel like I'm in the desert. Other
just
places
realized we've
I
got some birds. Sorry.
yeah, really nice.
Is
There's
it?
some really nice VFX
It's
work
cool.
going in.
There
I
were some
have
really nice kites around here as well. I don't know if you saw them. I think they might have gone.
I'll come back kites. I like kites. So talking about the river, it's nice to see people developing out the river in the desert because it was basically felt sort of like the unloved child of rivers for a long time. We see the rocks coming out, people taking in Aaron's feedback really nicely. So one thing I would think about the river as you start to detail it out is look at desert rivers, look at some reference. This is once again Sam talking about ecosystems, but a desert river isn't just going to be water running through sand. It is going to be reeds. It's going to start drying out the further you get from the river. So you'll get dead grass, you'll get sticks on the edges with reeds, often thick reeds along the edges. There'll often be like river grass under the water, all that kind of stuff. So when you build out this river, oh yeah, that's the water temple. I'm kind of fond of the big octopus guy. Yeah, so I love, as a person who owns an octopus in a jar, that makes me happy. But yeah, so when you start building out the PCG for the river, which you should be doing, really think about making it feel like it is the source of life for the desert. It's where all life springs from. So it should be greener and lusher, and things that need water should gravitate towards it. It makes more sense to have settlements along the river than at the top of a mesa where it would be very easy to just die. But if you are building hilltop forts, make sure that you actually build out the environment around them and don't just drop some walls on a hill. So that was my other desert
how
feedback.
that water has ran through that world and has affected it over time, right? One of the things that you'll see are the kind of like inlays where it's the water has eaten away at a load of the
you'll see the striations in the rock.
And then it kind of like you almost get it thicker at the kind of at the top, so you can build in these really nice kind of like almost oppressive overhangs into this geometry that would look really nice.
Look up like for Americans at least, Utah is a really good reference for those kind of river canyons, desert river canyons. Mount Zion National Park, places like that. You can get these really crazy overhangs that flood in summer and become raging rivers. So it would be cool to see all of that. But yeah, I think the desert folk need to focus on getting their natural environment to a really good place and then fitting specific things within it. It would be nice to see more of those little low villages, because generally desert settlements aren't very big and often are, nomadic, right? So I think that's how you populate the desert, with sort of evidence of life. Yeah, I feel like there's great promise here. I love seeing the oasis and things like that, and I'd love to see more of that propagated across. It also adds visual variety and just it allows you to justify your more sort of settled elements within the desert in terms of living creatures and so on.
Yeah, and remember your scale as well, because some of these things are going to be a big, right? So when you're placing them down, just make sure you're playing regularly as you're doing it, because it's very easy to forget how big the things you're moving can be. Like, this thing that I've just put in is a very large asset.
It's like half a mile of rock.
Yeah,
fine, right?
It's quite big, yeah.
Don't be afraid to play with the environment just like this. Like, turn it into the environment you need. Just do it in a way that makes sense and contributes to the larger biome as a whole. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of potential here. Folks just need to find the right direction for it. I'll probably pop up in the Discord at some point. Let's see. But yeah, I think that was most of my desert feedback since all the skulls disappeared. It's like you knew I was coming. And
it's still there.
There's this one. Yeah, I just I get what this is going for. It just needs to be given a deep think about what it means to the player and what it's like to explore.
Just think about it as a playable level, as a level. More, I think, is going to really help as well. Just really, really step back and be like, okay, let's just forget for a second that this is a big skull. Like, what's the playable space and what are they supposed to do? The same with the pyramid as well. Even if you don't put an interior into this, which is fine, what's the outer explorable space like to play? If it's just going to be a kind of an almost kind of sheer plane that they're having to run up, then there's not really that much that they can do to play right with that area. So it's, again, I think
actual pyramids are stepped for them. They're not actually flat like that.
They
This is a
also
very
look good.
sci-fi pyramid. Also, it feels a bit prog rock,
Yeah.
which I don't know if that fits the brief so much. But yeah, think of what I would recommend doing for the pyramids is go and play in that space because there's a giant patch of open desert. It's the biggest patch of open desert in the game. And think about how to position things within that space. So as you enter it, you get the sense of how large it is, as opposed to having it feel really small because everything's so big and in the distance that it just pushes in the whole environment on you. Yeah, the big skull here seems to have gone away.
Yeah, they've still got the mannequins though. And again, it's like these mannequins just are. Think about them more as a sculptural piece. And then there's that leg is just in the way. Anyway.
Right. So,
there we go. Any other areas you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I was just going through my notes.
I think we've actually got some questions. We should.
Oh, we do. We could do some questions.
Take a look.
I had one note for sulfur. While Aaron's looking at the questions, do you want to switch to me for a sec, and I'll go over there. Okay, sulfur. Hi, sulfur. So I saw some really cool rock work because both sulfur and volcanic both have the same challenge, which is it's flat. It's very flat terrain, and so what you can do with that, I've seen some rock work starting to go in here. Is not sure about that material. I have no idea if that's correct or not. But there's actually some interesting rock shaping and sort of distinctive rock shapes that you can use as a motif across your environment to kind of break up the sulfur desert. So it's not just a flat line the whole way, because my fear is that if you do it entirely with human built settlements, then it's going to gain a bunch of buildings, whereas I love this sort of sparseness. But think about using your rocks and your rock language to kind of as a motif throughout the space to break it up a little bit. And it makes it more interesting and you feel like you're moving across it, because when a space is big and flat and you're running forward, you just don't feel like you're making progress. So having things you can run by really helps. In the volcanic, I wanted to talk because you're doing a lava river, yay. So you've built up the environment around the lava river. I'm sure Aaron will have actual art feedback, but I think this is a start to something you should be thinking about in general with the volcanic plain here. Is one, lava plains aren't flat. They're in fact full of sharp, scary rocks that jut out interesting angles, and you can really build up this flat space. Like you have the volcano village, which I love. I like your shape language. I like the angles. I love all that block out. And I feel you can build up this space to that. You can have almost multiple layers of environment using lava rock to put in secondary and tertiary layers of rock geometry, not too different to the stuff that's the underside of the rock village. It makes sense, right, that they built up on there and using the pre-existing sort of lava spaces. So I would love to see more lava rivers with interesting little rivulets between them, all of that, unless there's a technical reason we shouldn't do it, in which case Aaron will tell me. I think it would really sell the space. And so I'm really happy to see that coming in. I would love to see sort of the volcano village and the lava rivers come together as a sort of unified design language for the space. I feel like there's a lot of potential there. So that was me. Go back to Q&A.
No, I agree. Yeah, it's good. I mean, the landscape resolution by default is a pixel per meter, right? And that's not a high resolution to work at. So, you know, when you're looking at creating that kind of like height variation, especially when again, like the landscape can only go vertically. It can't push out past that. We really need to start thinking about, you know, kind of like the actual design of the space a bit more, you know, kind of like in creating that height variation and creating that interest in the scene, rather than just going, okay, well, I've been given a flat floor, so I'm just going to leave it as a flat floor. You know, really think about how you can kind of like push it and add more to it. So I think that, you know, the tiered city that they've got in there at the moment is a really nice start, but I would start thinking about how you can transfer that across to the entire play space.
Absolutely.
For that world.
You can see, like, I'm standing over here, scrolling around, and from here, this is actually one of my favorite views in the game right now, at the top of this sort of temple up these stairs, and you look over and you see the volcano city, and you pan over and just imagine like that language continuing all the way down so it doesn't become cool place, flat place. Like if it's all one, then every vista you see of that space will be enticing and interesting.
And think about it as well, like not just as kind of like a, okay, well, I'll take that and I'll just copy it across the entire thing. Really play around with like how it scales up and down and the the differences in that resolution as you're looking at it from afar and then getting closer and closer and closer. It's it's really going to help build up that space more. Okay, let's run through a couple of questions.
I'm
So,
with yeah.
will there be a more global effort made for stylized VFX use in the world? I would say that's a question for the VFX team. And yeah, definitely. So there's a whole VFX group who are working. They are building VFX. I haven't seen too many of them be added to the game world yet. We did get one or two very large VFX get added, but certainly it'd be great to start seeing those get added to the world. Kind of over time. So
Yes,
yes, there's a
absolutely.
VFX team. They are building stuff. We've seen some really cool ones so far. And if you look around the world, there are a couple of really nice ones that have been added. So
Hey, look,
there's
ash. It's raining ash.
yeah, those
Actually, I'm
birds,
not.
right? And there
I'm
was a
not.
kite one. There's
Yeah,
also an absolutely lovely. I'm going to try and remember where it is now. I think there's one in the. It's what happens when we shouldn't have built an eight. Why did we build such a big open world, an 8 kilometer open world? Um,
I blame my lead. Um,
Thanks. So there's these bottles which are really nice. Again, like just really swaying, lovely. Definitely earned some swag for these ones. They've got some really nice movement to them. So those are really nice. Again, that's someone in the VFX team, kind of worked on those. But we've seen some water ripples and some breaks and things like that. So those ones seem to be running a mile a minute, but that's going quite quickly. But still, some really nice stuff going on in there as well. So if you look for them, they are around. But yeah, definitely be great to start seeing some more of those come in. Especially again, lava region could do with some and sulfur, just getting some real kind of like geysers and stuff like
gas.
that going up.
Yeah,
Yeah, gas and stuff like that would be really cool.
make it interesting colors. It doesn't have to
Mm.
be gray. So yeah, like the lava rivers have ash around them now, falling from the volcano, which is really nice. But if you think about it, when a lava river hits the sea, if you've ever been to Hawaii or anywhere like that, there is a huge plume of fire and steam that sprays out that you can see from miles away, and it feels like a perfect place for our VFX team to step in and really help sell the space.
I don't know if anyone's too afraid as well to tackle the smoke plume coming from the volcano, but you're welcome to. This is very much a placeholder that I threw in. So it'd be great to see someone really give that a go and really tackle it from that side as
There was
well.
some nifty PCG fog that showed up a little while ago. There's definitely some
Oh,
people out there with skill sets.
I don't. I think it got removed, didn't
I
it?
think that was me, but yeah.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, it
Um,
was really nifty. It was just making it hard for people to actually see their terrain. That's why it's good to reach out to the biome team. The person who made that fog, really cool fog. Sorry, I had to remove it temporarily.
okay. Hello. Some constructions need to be close from the water body ocean and the waves are going above some of the meshes. Is there a way to prevent that locally, that effect? So yes, the water bodies, we should probably just run through these at some point and just give them
Yeah, we need to give
another
them a
pass
scrub.
through. But again, so one of the other things as well is the water for the materials team is definitely up for grabs. So if you'd like to do the water for the game, you are absolutely free to do so. I think even Sulfur have already done their own water implementation, which is looking just a little bit too blue, I would say. But you're absolutely welcome to go in and do your own water for each of the different regions. The main thing is, I think it's water attenuation wave depth will actually change how much it undulates. So you can see that this is quite aggressive at the moment, but if we drop it, you can kind of reduce that down a little bit. It might even be another variable in there that you can tweak to change it. So we can probably adjust the max height offset as well, just to reduce that down. I think a lot of the water bodies are locked. So I'll go through and I will drop those down so they're a little bit less intense.
We have a feature request for that one specifically. So
yeah. So yeah, again, because my brain is like a sieve, so I will forget this stuff very easily. Is there a way to add objects that are already placed in the world to an existing level instance? I think about. I'm assuming you mean that if you've added an asset into the main level and you want to move it through to a level instance, yes, you definitely can. And I will attempt to do that. So if we've got let's say we wanted to add, just add a cube. So let's say we wanted to add this cube that's currently in the main world and we want to move it to this level. If we go in and edit that level, and then we choose our persistent level and select our asset, we should be able to do a level and then move selection 2, which will kind of promote it up to our twisted spore map. Hey, look at that, it did it. That's good. So you can see that now that's got a save icon. I won't save that because I don't want to mess with this person's map, but that's how you kind of move an asset between level instances, and that once that's been moved to that level instance, that's going to be fixed in that level instance now. So if we dropped another version of that level instance in, that cube would then be present in that level. So that's how you transfer things through. Best practices on PCG. Seems it's a bit finicky. The things you need to know to make it work with the world partition and generally other useful things to take into consideration. So we've got quite a lot of documentation on PCG, so I definitely have a look at that. If you want to get into the really advanced stuff, Electric Dreams demo has some incredibly complex PCGs that are well worth picking apart if you're interested in that one. My main piece of advice, again, I did a talk on PCG at Unreal Fest New Orleans, so you might have to have a bit of a search through because I don't think it got posted individually yet, but it is part of the live streams that you can go and see. So I would definitely take a look at that. The main thing to keep in mind is that if you are generally, if you're building a PCG that is contained to a small area, you want to leave that as not partitioned. So you want to leave that as a standalone spawned group. Generally, you can just add that to the main level, but you can also pack it inside a level instance if it's going to be nested in several layers. If you are building something like this, where it's really sprawling and spans across multiple cells, and again, when we talk about cells, the best way to do that is by just taking a look at your preview grid. So you can see that each of these are our kind of cells. So if we're spawning stuff that sits outside of that, you need to mark the PCG is partitioned. And then you need to keep in mind that when you do that, you essentially create a master PCG, which kind of holds the original data, and then you also get a PCG for each square that original PCG is covering. So basically that means that each of this stuff gets processed multiple times. So you need to make sure that data is being contained within each PCG square. So you can see it doesn't necessarily line up with this one, but it is contained to a PCG square section. So as you click on each of these, you can see that they fill a square volume. And what that's going to mean is that it's just going to keep that data contained to each world partition unit and reduce the amount of content that's actually being loaded in overall, because by default it would just load in the entire forest once you go into the bounds, which we don't necessarily want.
Aaron, I put your talk in the Epic Tips channel.
Awesome.
It's a link that will jump you directly to his talk in the hour 6 of the live stream.
Yeah. There's a lot of content there. But yeah, so that goes into kind of like the more obscure stuff. And then also just keep in mind PCG is, I don't think it's marked as experimental anymore, but it is still beta. So that means that there's more likely to have some bugs and you need to be a bit cautious when using it in production. But we're using it a lot here. And again, if you do have more questions, feel free to reach out to either the Tech Art channel or you could post in Editor Help, that kind of thing. I think it would be awesome to be able to explore the map at night. I'm wondering if the demo will have the option to change the time.
Don't do
Yes,
that.
you've been able to for since the project started. We have a time of day manager. You go in here and we have the time normalized, which lets you kind of just scale through all the different time of day. We have a full day and night cycle. The current CL that I've downloaded is currently broken because someone has put a completely separate sky atmosphere, cloud system, directional light, and so on into their level instance. So please don't do that because it will break. You need to mark that as main world only if you're putting lights inside the level instance that are globally affecting, because that stuff will propagate up to the main map. So just make sure you're not doing that, and then you will get the full lovely time of day that we've added in here. That's got, you know, kind of all the stars. It's got a moon. Again, moon and sun both up for grabs, doing a texture for that. So if you would like to texture the moon, feel free to do so. We can add that in once you have done that. So yeah, full time of day is in. Is there a bit? Sorry, go on, Sam.
It's worth noting that we're going to be doing an update to the game code, hopefully today, that will allow you to also set time of day through a console command or even through the menu. At some point before we end live stream, I should probably demo the new features that are coming in so people see the new hotness. But yeah, should I do that now while we're talking about it?
Yeah.
I'll show off the console commands and some of that stuff. Sebastian could be with us today. So I am in just in Titan Sandbox. So this is not yet available to you folks, but will be once it is checked in to the mainstream. So big things that have come with Code Update. One, we have a developer menu, which has an option that says Show HUD Action Bar. What that does is you can see either mouse and keyboard or controller with some gorgeous engineering art. Sebastian is, like me, not an artist. But as you can see, it's contextual. So when you're jumping, jump turns to glide. You can see all the different movement options that you have available to yourself at all times. You can turn that on or off in the developer menu. And you may see some other fun things in here. So there's a time of day slider that won't work in Titan Sandbox, but just like you can use the console commands or the time of day manager to change time of day in editor. If you're in game and want to see it from a different time of day, you can just come and slide this bar. And you may also see photo album. So let's talk about that for a sec. So we've added photo mode. This allows you either with FreeCam or with OrbitCam to take a screenshot. I'm going to take a screenshot now, or I'm going to hit the wrong button and not do it like a genius. So I'm going to take a photo now. There is a photo being taken, and now I can leave photo mode. If I go to photo album, you'll see my screenshot there. So you can scroll through it. Right now, you can't load them up to look at them closer or delete them or anything like that. That's all functionality that's coming, but we do have a working photo mode that'll be going in. And that's great when you want to either show off your assets or report bugs. If you can take a screenshot in a photo mode, they save out to your saved folder in your Titan project, saved photos, they're all in there. So just go, if you find a bug, take a photo of it. If you find a cool thing, take a photo of it, put it on the Discord. And so along those lines, we've added a bunch of fun console commands that are coming in. So if you type Titan into the console while you're playing, you'll see them all. And so the one that I want to show you is Titan get map coordinates. And it's hard to see on stream, but in the top left corner where my health is and everything, it is putting the map coordinates. They'll appear there for 10 seconds. However, it also puts them in your output log. So if you found a bug, you're like, oh, I fall through the world here, or this terrain is weird, or anything, give us map coordinates when you're reporting the issue, because it makes it much, much easier to track down issues if we know where they are. And also map coordinates of cool things you've seen. It's just a really easy way in a world as big as ours to find your way around. So this came up when, from the Arctic folks, they were looking at wind gusts as a thing. And we actually have those. We have a Titan wind volume called Built by Sebastian because I was like, I want wind volumes, and he's
It's
way
maybe
too nice.
the slowest wind
Yeah,
theme.
but the thing is, they're not just vertical. So you can, if you're, say, not an idiot like me, um, yeah, I am smart. But yeah, so basically you can place them and then use them to push the player along as well as see,
Yeah.
that's much better. So if you want to guide people up cliffs or off of cliffs, if you want to do wind gust stuff, I like these because they're not something that's forced on the player. They're very much opt in, and they're configurable. You can set how much velocity they have, all of that kind of thing. So you can really define them for your space. But Titan Wind Volume, you should be using them. You can add gameplay. They're built by us, so they should be sound. If they have issues, we will fix them. But there are a bunch of other console commands in there that are worth showing. You can, oops, wrong console. So other things you can do in Titan now is you can teleport to a landmark. You can teleport 3D or 2D using coordinates. So if you want to teleport across the map quickly, you can just type that into console with the coordinates you want to go to, and it will take you there. You can set the time of day. So just set time of day in hours, then put in the float for the hours that you want. And so again, if you're playing and you just want to set to a specific time of day, do that. And then most of them are things that you don't need to worry about because they're mostly for the back end. But the Titan teleport, what it does is it's not an immediate teleport because we have to stream in the environment you're teleporting to. I could probably stop streaming now. And not look at my Zoom though. But yeah, so it's basically what it does is it puts you in this animated I'm about to teleport state, loads in the new environment. When the new environment is loaded in enough that you can teleport there, it teleports you there. So there's a little bit of a delay, but then you appear in the place because we have a giant streaming world and we need to accommodate that. But if you need to bop around the world really quickly, or if someone say gives you coordinates and says, hey, your thing's busted at this location, you can just pump those coordinates into teleport and go right there. So there we have a bunch of new features coming in, hopefully today from Sebastian. We're just doing some testing now. And you should be using them. There's a bunch of tuning on the walk that is not finished yet. So the walk while better is still not done. We are enabling async physics, which for those of you playing with buoyancy should make your life more interesting. My dog is freaking out, so I'm going to mute myself and let Aaron talk.
Cool. Well, I think yeah. Let's just run through a couple more questions because we've had some really good ones pop up. Will the Discord server remain active after the jam? If not, how long will it stay? We hadn't thought about keeping the Discord going, but if people want to keep it, they can. We probably need to find a way of transferring it over to some elected members so that they can keep the Discord going. We'd probably like to just look at it more as kind of like a interested third party rather than something. But again, like the whole project's going to be available and kind of like available to everyone once it's finished. So you would be more than welcome to carry on making Project Titan as a project, as a group, if you'd like to. But that's not something that we would be, we would be running or managing past that point. Both Sam and I need a long break, I think, after this thing wraps up. So we'll be taking some time off after, I think, and relaxing slightly. But
turning
yes,
into giant skulls in the desert slowly but surely.
Yeah. So yes, yeah, we don't necessarily plan to shut it down, but it would be something that we'd need to find someone who'd want to carry it on. For that kind of thing. Does Project Titan have an official logo? We do have an official logo. We will be adding it to the project shortly, probably today, so that you can see it. We've also got all of our swag branded with it as well, so you'll be able to really push out that logo. And yes, of course, you can use it for any of your portfolio pieces to show that it's part of the project. That is absolutely fine. So the breakdown of shapes and forms and character art was really great last time. Could we see something similar for texture and asset modeling? Absolutely. We will do that in another live stream. We've got 3 live stream lined up already, which feature our wandering critics who have started to ramp up their activities in the Discord. You may have noticed, but we will be having each of them on for the live streams to kind of talk about, kind of art critique and really kind of improving it. I think I'm going to be doing, once my throat is slightly better, I'm going to be going on the internal Discord, and we'll do some critique sessions there. So you'll be able to jump on a voice channel and get me to have a look at some of the work you're doing. And we'll do some critique. I generally try and keep those to videos because then it just becomes more usable for everyone. But I can see how that's useful, so we'll definitely look at doing that. Question. Oh, Sam, there's some good ones for you in here. I don't know how your dog's feeling about it though.
He's decided that Amazon delivery drivers are okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So there's a lot of people who and well, not that many, but there's a good few people who want to handle just they want some more design information. Let's have a look. Some feedback on the river village in the tropics would be great. Could you give some feedback regarding the area in front of the castle in Clifftop, which I think you did mention briefly, but maybe they want a bit more.
Let's go.
What is the correct way to plan out a space? That's a great
question. That's a fun one.
And a massive one. I think maybe that might be a great video.
Yeah, I think that's a video or an essay no one will read. But yeah. High level, best way to plan out a space is start out with come up with a shape or concept that you like and start playtesting it immediately. So block it out, even if it's just squares, playtest it, get it to a state where the sort of blockouts that we're now seeing in the world, where it looks like the correct shape, has correct collision, all of that, get it there really quickly, because you're going to stay in that state. In a traditional game designer, I would stay in the like high fidelity blockout state for a long time to iterate the playable space. So you want to get there quickly and then iterate a bunch quickly. Rapid iteration is the thing I talk about a lot. Get in there, and it really depends on your game. Like, this is an exploratory game, so you should be exploring the space, trying all the different movement modes, all of that, and going, when does this feel weird? How can I modify my collision to make this a little more easy to go through? My door's too small, all of that. Do that in the blockout phase. So you only have to do the fancy, expensive phase once. And that way, when you get art feedback, it's usually art feedback for the blockout is shape and form. Art feedback for the final version is more specific to the final version. You don't have to redo your shape and form because it's already been through the process. So at least for us, that is the way to go. If you're making a first-person shooter, that's obviously an entirely different thing, but you still have to think about the use of the space, how the player traverses it, and what they're going to do in it. And that is sort of at the heart of layout. But yeah, I'll do a video for next week on that. He says, and then goes, "Oh no, I just crashed. Yay."
Just keep it under 10 minutes, I think is probably that.
Yeah, my videos are like 4 minutes long. I think that's, and then my voice gives up. It's great.
Okay. As long as I can speak eloquently for. I would say as well, if we take a look at the Clifftop one, I've just brought that up on
do you want to bring it up and
switch over?
I
think the big thing with this one is just to make sure it's all traversable right from the start. It's very so you've got a lot of winding paths in it, which is kind of cool. But again, like, make sure that the whole, if we're designing the playable space, we should make sure that this is all traversable right from the get-go. So like with this one, they might have fixed this, but when I last played it, it just stopped part way, so I couldn't get all the way through. This is a very, very steep set of stairs. So again, like, really think about how that's going to be traversed. And then I reached this point and I'm like, okay, so I keep going around, keep going through. Again, it's like
Well, yeah, my feedback is, why is your path so circuitous? It takes you, it's like a path that doesn't necessarily make sense to me. Like, and also, yeah, that really steep bit should be something else, like, or less steep, one or the other, because it will make the player character look bad when they're moving. We don't want that.
I'd also say as well, maybe think about like different ways of getting there. Like, it's like it might be nice to have kind of like some more traversable ways of getting around. And then kind of like this space, again, like really think about what you're trying to say with this space. Like it's supposed to be like grand and opulent and things like that. So really start thinking about that.
Like it's a piazza. It should be treated like a piazza.
Yeah. And then again, like this should all be playable, right? Like the
Yeah.
most important thing for the block out is that this should all be like a very clearly traversed space. So again, like it kind of lots of it just kind of like stops in places. There's kind of big gaps and big holes, which again was kind of like one of our biggest problems with this original, with the original castle, is that it just the design just stopped kind of partway through. Um, so really think about that as well. This doorway is good size. I think I
It
will.
actually fits the camera.
That's a good sized doorway. So that's nice. And again, like it's the entranceway. This should
Yeah,
be a
so that's
big
my
deal,
other
right?
note. I don't know where to go in. Where do I go in? Where's the door? Like, I'll run up there and assume there's no way in and miss all your awesome work. Yeah, sorry, that's one of
Again,
those things.
like
It's like you're leading people around and you go up and you go through the thing, and then you're like, here's a flat wall.
yeah. I
Like,
definitely think like these, kind of large discs, I definitely think that they've got some potential. But you really need to think about how the player gets up them and around them and think about the different height variations you can have. It's starting to come together a little bit there. But I definitely think you could go and kind of like really kind of like play around with that space a bit more and make it a bit more interesting and fun to kind of navigate and move around.
those
Um,
discs almost feel like, again, they could be like gardens or something like that, like a sense would add some variety of terrain and some variety of color and visual interest up there. And also castles tended to have those, so
yeah.
it sort of fits the space.
So a
Which
couple of
which was
clip
the other
questions,
one?
but yeah.
Was there another one
Um,
that wanted feedback while we're?
I think it was more about kind of like how do you design interiors?
Oh yeah,
Was
that's
like a key one.
interiors are all about the player camera and player movement to a large degree, because you can't have an interior be an empty room unless you've done the most amazing empty room in human history. It has to have stuff in it. The stuff is going to interfere with the camera. So think about where you position your props and layout and the layout of the space. So one, the player can traverse it without getting hung up on stuff, and two, it doesn't make the camera go wonky. So one of the things you'll notice in interiors in third person shooters a lot is they tend to have half height props. The running joke of half height cover, we work at Epic Games, we know. But washing machines and kitchen counters and that kind of stuff in a realistic space are all half height. And what that means is that the camera can keep going all the way to the back wall. Well, the player can't. So you never back up against the wall, which means the camera never pushes into your head. It makes it easier to navigate, less confusing. So think about, like in a big space like this, you could put church pew type things up against the side windows or so on if you wanted to keep the player from pressing up against the wall. When you're laying out a space, the other thing is big empty rooms gain a lot just from having a few things in them. Like when I'm running through, like if Aaron's running through this space and there are some props in here, suddenly the space feels bigger because there's more parallaxing as I move through the environment. The thing's moving at different speed. As is, everything's in the far distance, and I'm just crossing a big empty void. Like, give me things to look at, give me things to walk around, make the path through the room interesting.
Go play Dishonored.
Go play Dishonored, or if you can, your machine can run it. Probably now Dishonored too. That's really good games, and then play Prey.
Yeah, so this is again like this, so that's all all really good points. But yeah, I think the key with the block out is making sure that it is all traversable and all playable. So kind of like how do I get to here?
Run through it a bunch and go, what annoys me about this space?
And again, like just this space isn't big enough. This space is way too small. This is all too narrow. So just make it all bigger. But yeah, I think the big thing is to to go in and really play, have a look and play Dishonored. And yeah, like Sam said, Dishonored 2 as well. Like the interiors of that space are a really good demonstration of how you can go about really building those up. And if you play through it, you'll see that there's not actually that much in kind of in there. They're not cluttered by any stretch. No.
Or even particularly huge. They sell their hugeness really well.
Okay, some more questions. Does the landscape support vertex painting? I created a material that needs a path, asset otherwise. No, we've put in a temporary way of doing some paths using the runtime virtual texture. That's currently just an interim step while we kind of figure out the best way to do it. So and there's also another question in here about the best way to add water to the world and how that's going to be implemented, because again, like it's hard to do that without it interacting with the landscape. One thing I will say is that you can't build a landscape in the same way if you once you get to this size, right? It's one of the reasons why we've built the landscape to this size, to demonstrate some of the limitations that you start running into when you build a world at this resolution. So if we talk about kind of landscape editing, landscape splines, landscape layers, kind of all the water systems that you put in, a lot of that stuff starts breaking once you get past a certain size because you just don't have enough memory to store all of that information. So the way that kind of like landscape layers work, landmass with the blueprint tools that let you edit the landscape, the way that that all works is that it basically resamples the entire landscape at the exact resolution that it's at. So in this instance, it's 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers, so about an 8K texture. And it does that, and it stores it at every single layer. And it does that for every single weight as well. So you have both the height, which is quite high precision. For this one, it's a 16-bit precision. And then you have all of the landscape weight layers on top of that, which are also 8K, that you have to account for. So anytime you add a kind of like your water system, when you add a path, when you add a landmass brush, or you add a new layer, each of those things is basically duplicating that entire set of textures that you're generating. And you'll very quickly find that you will just run out of memory almost immediately. And that's why we had to roll our own landscape solution for designing this world, because landmass doesn't work at 8K. It's not really practical to go in and paint and sculpt that information because the landscape tools are quite primitive. They're kind of designed to work at a very set scale. And we wanted something that you could go in, you could play and iterate on very quickly. So that's why, kind of Sam and I made this landscape tool that allows us to build 8 kilometers. And I think we had like 500 layers, right, on this and being able to move it around. You imagine if you try to do that in the current tool where it's an 8K texture plus all the weight layers, and you do that at 500 layers just to try and navigate it, it just doesn't work. So the reason that all of the water systems are set to not affect landscape is because that system simply does not work at the scale that we're working at. Even the water systems themselves have been very carefully set. And again, like sometimes they can break a little bit, but basically you have to go in and you have to set the way that these meshes work to basically use them as static meshes and to have them as sections, so that they don't kind of go absolutely crazy, kind of in terms of like memory usage. So that's the reason why kind of, apart from the fact that if we allowed anyone to edit the landscape, the entire landscape would just be completely kind of messed up with all of the different people trying to go back and forth on different things. So you really have to think about the landscape differently. And again, this is going to be a really, really important point once we actually start to get to a certain level of density, because at the moment, so I can load in the entire map. So I can basically just select the entire thing and just go load it into the world, right? Now, I have a very, very expensive and high spec computer that is kind of solving the problem with money, right, by letting you do that, but there's going to get to a point where I'm not going to be able to do that anymore, and we're going to probably pass that point quite a long time ago for a lot of people who aren't necessarily on as higher spec hardware. And that's why we use world partition, right? It allows us to unload the whole level so that we don't have to bring that entire scene into the project. And at that point, it falls back to the HLOD meshes, and then we can load in very specific areas of the map. So if you want to work on this game world, you can kind of see, in fact, if we go in, you can see where it generates janky HLOD meshes for all of the assets. And again, we're kind of we'll get better results as we refine that instance as we go along. You can kind of see some areas where it works. So that rock geometry is no longer the original assets. It's actually just a voxelized single mesh representation of that asset. So you can see that kind of as you go through, as we kind of play around with that space, you can do that. So what we can do is we can go in and we can select a specific region, and we can either drag and select a specific area, or we can click on a cell and tell it to load that, and it will load just that area, right? And as we get bigger and bigger, and well, not bigger and bigger, but as the world gets more and more densely populated with content, we're going to have to start working to those individual areas more and more, because ultimately we just don't have enough memory to load in the entire map at once. That's just a limitation, like a technological limitation that we're in at the moment. If we didn't have that problem, we wouldn't need these kinds of streaming solutions in the first place, because we'd be able to just play the whole thing, right? So this is just something that we need to consider when we're kind of when this game project starts getting more and more dense and harder and harder to open. For those of you who can't even open the main map, which may be some of you who are on very low spec machines, apart from being able to set your scalability level down, which will strip out some of the kind of harder end render assets, we have created some base level assets for you that contain the main player character, so you can use them as a scale ref, and you can still bring in assets that way. So that's absolutely fine for you to do it. You just may not be able to work in the main level. You can also work in just the level instance and start adding stuff that way, but you may need the context of the main world in order to do that.
Again, this is the game development experience, is often when you're building a large open world game, it hits a point where your machine cannot open the main world, and you have to work in an instance of it. I mean, my first Unreal 4 game, we had to build special instances because it hit that point. So this is a useful experience. By the way, all the people asking for specific area feedback, I will just post those directly in your Biome channels with screenshots and text after, so we don't have to do it live on stream. So we can give more generalized feedback, but I'm happy to give some design feedback on Mushroom Village and Megatree and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And you can see as well in here, like as I fly through, as I get too close to certain areas, the thing disappears. And the reason that it's doing that is because it's reaching the point where it should load in the actual assets, right? It's reaching the point where it's going, okay, I should swap that out with the original content, but it's obviously not loaded in because this content is not loaded. So we get a lot of people asking when they first load the game, it's like, hey, why can't I see, why does everything disappear when I get too close to it? And that's the reasons that it's basically you're looking at the HLOD distance, the proxy geometry, and when you get close enough to it, you have to go in, you have to manually, kind of load in that area and say, hey, I want to see the actual physical thing. So eventually, what we hope to get to is a point where this is all done dynamically in editor, just like if you were playing the game. But at the moment, we've got this intermediary step where you're getting to see kind of like the HLOD distance, but it doesn't automatically load in the area that you're in at the moment. So like I said, eventually we hope to get there, but we're not quite there yet in terms of the editor. Right, I think we are well over our time on this. We've been going for 2 hours, so I think we will probably wrap it up there. There are still quite a lot of questions. Like I said, I'm going to try and do a session on our Discord where people can just jump in and ask questions, and we can do some direct feedback with them. But for now, I think that's pretty much as far as we can do. So Sam, thank you very much for that excellent design pass on that content. We will be back with you again next week. We're going to do unless something crops up that's going to be more interesting, we're going to be doing a bit of a deep dive into the landscape design tools that we built and how we built the actual main game map. Again, working at this scale means that you have to work with some pretty interesting solutions to try and avoid that kind of issue. So we'll be doing a bit of a design dive into how we built that. It's all 100% blueprints, which is quite interesting. Like I said, it's about 500 layers or so of data that we use to actually build up the landscape using different stamps and different tools to build that out. So yeah, we'll be going over that content next week. It's going to be a pretty interesting one, so definitely stay tuned for that. Again, thank you for all of the background people who are hidden away, making sure that this live stream works well. And thank you to our partners, AWS and Perforce, for making sure that we've been able to run this thing incredibly smoothly. I have to say, we've got a lot of people in the at Perforce who are working in the Discord to make sure it all stays smooth and reset people's passwords when they forget them because they can't remember them. So yes, thank you very much to all of you and everyone in the Discord and kind of in the Titan project working away. It's again absolutely incredible.
It's amazing
stuff. We really don't want any of this critique to be seen as a negative. Iteration is key. I don't think I've ever made a single piece of work that has been good the first time round. I've always had to iterate on it. So, kind of if you're feeling like this is a bad thing, don't. This is absolutely how game development works. You've got to iterate on this stuff to make it good. So please see this as a positive thing and a way to improve on the work that you're doing. And we hope that will help you kind of like build better content and learn how to build this content well, so that you can use this in the future. That's all we've got time for. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. And we will see you in the Discord. Bye.
Bye, everybody.